Hello, this is the Progressive Cynic, and today we'll be talking about the situation in Syria. Unfortunately, the situation in Syria is an absolute disaster, as Assad has escalated the conflict with the rebels by using chemical weapons. On August 21st, between 350 and as many as about 500 people were killed in a chemical weapons bombardment outside of Damascus. We don't know exactly how many were killed because it was the chemical weapons accompanied an artillery strike, and a lot of people may not have been found as of yet. Currently, 350 casualties are confirmed at local hospitals. Over 3,600 people have come in showing symptoms, and the Syrian opposition estimates that over 500 people were killed. Now, obviously, they have an incentive to inflate the numbers, but it still is a tragedy, regardless of whether it's 350 dead or 500 dead. Now, this event, unfortunately, puts the United States in a very precarious position. President Obama has previously announced that the use of chemical weapons is a red line and that we must get involved. Now, any involvement in Syria is bad. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like the present administration is listening to cooler heads and may go ahead with an ill-conceived set of interventions in the Syrian conflict. Now, any intervention by the United States has the potential to have massive negative consequences, both to the United States and, more importantly, to the Syrian people. I say more importantly, not because I am more fond of Syria than the United States, but because the Syrian people have far more to lose than Americans. Now, it is true that the use of chemical weapons is a violation of international law and that the international community needs to take action. Personally, I support any number of sanctions and strikes done by a variety of nation states and international actors once we have consensus on the response. We can't have single countries like the United States rushing in and causing problems without an international consensus. That leads us down the path of Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, polling by Reuters has shown that 9% of the American people support an intervention. So anytime you hear people in the media saying that the American people are really behind some massive intervention campaign in Syria, they are simply lying or do not know the facts. At best, 25% of Americans support intervention, but that is only if chemical weapons are conclusively proven to have been used. Now, the situation in Syria is immensely complex. I wrote an article 2 weeks ago saying that the Egyptian conflict was an absolute clusterfuck because we don't know which side to support. I mean, there are bad people on both sides, and it's only a matter of determining what is the lesser of two evils. The Syrian situation makes the Egyptian situation look like a cakewalk. On one side, we have Assad, who is a vicious dictator who apparently has killed over 100,000 of his own people in order to keep power, and who may have used chemical weapons. Actually, at this case, it's pretty much conclusive, given the fact that the UN has confirmed it officially. On the other hand, we have the rebels, who it is certainly true that many of them are just average Syrians trying to overthrow a dictator. They want freedom just like every other human being. But, unfortunately, large factions within the Syrian opposition are al-Qaeda or terrorist affiliates. Now, these people are extremely dangerous and have shown themselves to be willing to kill indiscriminately, and they've even been suspected of using chemical weapons in an attempt to draw international outrage against Syria, in essence a false flag attack. There is no good way for us to support the Syrian opposition without also supporting these people. Unfortunately, this makes it very difficult to fight a proxy war with, or to use them to fight the Syrian government by proxy, because any weapons we give the Syrian opposition could eventually be used against the United States or any other Western government which provides them. Now, we have several main choices that we can choose to use to respond to this situation. The first is to do nothing. Personally, I think that this sends a very bad message. Unfortunately, we have already announced that we would respond if chemical weapons were used. That kind of obligates us to do so, otherwise we are seen as weak, and other regimes may decide to utilize chemical weapons in the future because of that. Say North Korea. They see this as an example of us threatening some response if they do some horrible war crime. And when we don't do it in this situation, it makes them believe there's a possibility that they could get away with the same crimes. Now, while this situation is not necessarily good for a precedent, it is very low risk for the United States. We won't put any of our military personnel or hardware in harm's way, and we will just sit this one out. Unfortunately, this will also lead to a probable destruction of the Syrian rebellion and a continuation of the Assad regime. The second choice is partial involvement in Syria. This is the choice that the Obama administration appears to be taking. Partial involvement means there will be no boots on the ground, but we will set up a no-fly zone, possible limited engagements, giving the rebellion weapons, and also a sustained missile bombardment on military installations. This bombardment will be in an attempt to disrupt military operations in Syria to the point where the Syrian opposition gains an upper hand in the conflict. Now, unfortunately, key strategists, even the people who constructed this plan in the first place, have said that it is very unlikely that this plan will actually work. The Assad regime is it's willing to take a lot of pain, and odds are we don't have the time in order to do a sustained campaign. They'll just wait us out. In addition to this, there's a very real risk of a partial escalation, of a partial engagement escalating into a full engagement, where we realize that the partial engagement's not working, and so we decide to go in with boots on the ground. It's a very dangerous proposition, and we want to avoid this at all, in all ways possible. In addition to this, Hezbollah, the terrorist group, has announced that any United States involvement via missile strike will result in them shooting missiles into our ally Israel. This has the potential to kill many Israeli civilians, and we need to take this into account. In addition to this, if we start attacking Syrian chemical stores and we don't get them all in rapid succession, there's a very real possibility that the Syrian government is going to authorize the massive use of these weapons, because it's use it or lose it. Once they realize that eventually we're going to destroy their capacity, it sets a clock for them to either have their weapon stores destroyed or for them to expend them on the Syrian people. This could cause an escalation in the conflict and could result in many Syrian casualties. As a third choice of what the United States could do, we could provide limited aid to the Syrian opposition. This would include weapons and the provision of intelligence on where Syrian troops are, on where to strike. It would be equivalent to what we did in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen in the proxy war against Russia. We've seen how this ends, and unfortunately, today's ally might be tomorrow's enemy. Thus, any training and weapons we give these people could be turned on us. It's not an ideal situation. As a fourth choice, however, we have probably the worst. It's a full engagement. This would be full boots on the ground, United States military operations. Imagine the third Iraq. It would be an absolute disaster. And it would also have the added complication of putting American troops within range of chemical weapons. Because if Assad is willing to use chemical weapons on his own people, he will not hesitate to use it on the United States military if the military comes in. In fact, in statements he has already announced that he will take all steps to secure Syria if any foreign invaders try to get involved. All steps probably includes chemical weapons. Personally, I support limited engagement. I do not think we can sit this out because, unfortunately, the Syrian people will not be able to take out Assad without us. And if we let Assad get away with this, it sets the precedent that people are allowed to use weapons of mass destruction on their own people, and we will not do anything about it. Whether you like it or not, it kind of falls to us to enforce the international rule of law. It's kind of a strange situation considering the fact that we flout it at all possible occasion. I mean, unfortunately, there's no one else with the military capacity to do it. Now, we need to get international consensus before we do anything. We need to go to the UN, get approval for any actions that we take, and we need to do this immediately. After we get approval, I would support the use of drones as a weapon of war. Now, this is what drones are used for: limited engagements without any exposure of American personnel in hostile environments. What I think we should do is we should set the drones, which are currently killing innocent Pakistanis and Yemenis for absolutely no reason, and we should send them to Syria. Once there, they could observe the situation and pick out targets of importance in the use of chemical weapons. This would include chemical weapons batteries, storage bunkers, and any method of delivery, primarily artillery strike or aerial bombardment. Now, once we've isolated the locations of these stores and facilities, I would support the use of overwhelming force in order to destroy them. This isn't to say we would destroy the entire Syrian military. That's impossible. We would do extremely concentrated strikes on these locations in order to disrupt the ability of the Assad regime to use another chemical weapon. This likely won't get all of them in one strike, but it will be able to make a significant impediment to Assad utilizing chemical weapons in the future. From here, we should set a no-fly zone to eliminate the Syrian military's air superiority and give logistical and informational support to the Syrian rebels. This isn't to say we should give them weapons that might be used against us, but we should be giving them intelligence on their enemies. If this is successful, we also need to leave immediately. There will be no nation building, no king-making, no anything other than just to get Assad out by eliminating his ability to use chemical weapons and airstrikes against the rebels. We cannot let this become another adventure in nation building, because we simply don't have the money to do so. Now, there's no good option, and I don't think that my suggestion is going to be perfect. I don't think that it won't be without any sort of cost, and unfortunately, I think it's the least of all evils. What we cannot do is let the Obama administration pull us into a war we cannot win. We must keep this engagement extremely limited, and we must not let it drift. If we let it drift from, oh, we're going to just eliminate certain parts of the military, or we're going to do missile strikes, to, oh, we're going to send in some contractors, and then we're going to send in some training teams, and then, oh shit, we have a couple thousand ground troops, and then we have a surge. That leads to disaster for us, and put plainly, we're not the world's policemen. I mean, if we can do something to prevent innocent people from being gassed, I'm all for it. But if we have to invade a country and possibly unite the opposition against the foreign invaders, that's not an option that we can afford. Thank you. This has been the Progressive Cynic, and this has just been my opinion on the situation.